a Canadian radio sanctuary podcast.
I want to get into the thing about the Axe album because I was always very curious about that. Now, you recorded that when? It was March of 70 or something?
When did I leave the group? 69. I did that. The Axe album was recorded in January of 1970 while I was still with the group, and I didn't know I was going to be leaving. But the people at RC Victor, they weren't having too much success, and they still aren't, in signing new groups. Groups just are staying away from them. And so they went inside their groups. So they asked the Jefferson Airplane to do that Hot Tuna thing. And then they asked if I would do a guitar album similar to a Larry Coryell or Harvey Mandel type of album. Mm-hmm. And they also asked Burton and I to do an acoustic and piano album, just singing our own tunes the way they had been written. And so I did that album in January. When I left the group in June, it came out a month later in July, and it was hailed as my solo album after leaving the group. Mm-hmm. And it was a solo album, but it wasn't a commercial attempt at competing with the Guess Who, whereas if it would have been done after I left, I guess it would have competed with them or with their sound. But when I cut that album, I stayed away from the normal Guess Who sounds. I didn't want it to sound like musical backup tracks with Burton's voice missing. So I took the concept to make it, an Axe album and have all the different kinds of guitars playing that most guitar players like to play, light jazz and a light country, and a couple of jams. And that was the idea behind that album.
Was that done in the same studio as some of the Guess Who recording? Or?
Yeah, it was done at RCA Studios in Chicago, and I did it in 2 days. So that's the only time I had off. And I was lucky. I had Gary Peterson with me. We just had 2 days holiday in the Guess Who. And I got Don Triano from Bush, who's now in James Gang. He flew down and played on a few songs on the album.
You've got Randback Publishing now, right? Would you like to just say when this was put together and what it is?
Well, I was fortunate when I left the Guess Who to get out of all the contracts they were involved in, and they really had some goodies, and they still have. I was lucky enough to get out of all of them. And the only way you can really protect yourself in this business is to form your own production and your own publishing and, form your own companies to make sure you or your writers or whoever deserves the money should get it. And there's no other hanger-oners, So that was the reason behind that. I just wanted to publish my own material. And then as I got into producing other groups and this group, well, it's just natural to publish the writers, in the groups that I was doing just to take care of them.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm in a minority, but I tended to feel that when you left the Guess Who, that was it for groups with you. I thought you were going to be a record producer and that was it. Was I jumping the gun thinking that, or did you consider that?
Well, it was a permanent retirement until I couldn't sleep at night, and I'd find myself walking around at 10 or 11 o'clock at night with wanting to do something, mentally and physically exerting myself and getting rid of that emotional thing that builds up, because I'd been playing every night for 9 or 10 years. And I just found it hard to stop. And the bad thing about the Guess Who is when you really make it, big, in a big way, you lose control. And everything gets put in the control of managers and agents who you don't even know. And they think nothing of sending you out for 3 or 4 or 5 months solid on the road just so they can get their commission. They don't care what you're going through or what's happening to your families back home or what's happening to the group internally. They just send you out to get their commission. So when I started Brave Belt, I did it with the idea in mind of trying as hard as possible to keep it under control. And if we all decide to go out for 2 weeks, we go out for 2 weeks. But in the Guess Who, we'd go out for 2 weeks, and just as the time was up, we'd get a phone call saying, hey, we got you another 2 weeks, and we got you another 3 weeks, and we would never get home. I did want to retire, but I couldn't because I was just too restless, and I wanted to do it really, really on a smaller scale, although I want this group to make it big. I also want us to control it. You don't need to work as hard as you used to in the old Bill Haley days. I don't think you could pick your places to play, and whatever you don't make on your road appearances you make in record sales if you're turning out good records.
When did Chad leave and why or whatever?
He left about October of last year, just before Christmas. And that's right, he left on Halloween. And it was a blow to us because we had been very close, and to suddenly lose 25% of your identity and your sound and your concept of music, we found it very hard to replace him and accept a new identity. So we just decided to keep the three of us and just tighten up a bit, and everybody have to do a little bit more work. And his reasons for leaving were, I guess, the same reasons he quit the Guess Who 4 years ago. He just didn't want to do it. It's just about that simple. I mean, he had his reasons, but there's no reason for me to go into them. But it just wasn't for him.
I guess it was RPM or someplace. I was reading about your publishing in regard to Los Angeles and promoting Canadian groups down there.
Part of the thing of publishing, I figure there's no point trying to get rich off of one song, or in a writer trying to get rich off of his group doing it, when a song really can last forever. Mm-hmm. And so I just thought in handling the group's publishing and trying to protect them from the thieves who were in the business, there was no point in me giving them the big spiel on being their publisher unless I was active. So I opened the Los Angeles office and have a guy running it for me. And every time he gets a new song, he takes it around to all the producers and all the groups in town who are doing recording sessions. And we've had about 40 or 50 recordings done of those songs, which are going to appear, I guess, from now for the next couple of years, depending on when they're released, on albums and B-sides. And sooner or later we'll be lucky enough, I think, to get an A-side by a major artist, and they'll start the whole thing functioning as an office. People will be calling that office to get good tunes. So that was the idea behind that.
Now, when you recorded in Chicago, was it because of RCA or a preference for that studio? And do you see a future in big recording studios in Canada, or better recording studios?
Well, when I cut the Axe album in Chicago, we were in Chicago and had the 2 days off, the Guess Who. So it was just natural to cut there, and there was no place in Canada to cut then. But since then, Toronto Sound has opened in Toronto, and Eastern Sound, Manta Sound, and the RCA studios in Toronto got all new English equipment. And I think the studios in Canada can compare to anywhere else in the world. Equipment-wise, it's really easy to buy the equipment. What's more important is there's engineers coming to Canada, and there are Canadian engineers who are gaining the knowledge of sounds, and they're all growing good ears. Mm-hmm. They know what things should sound like, and I think that's really important. And now a lot of groups are coming to Canada just to record.
Didn't Neil Young, David Briggs, did they put a studio in Toronto? I heard they
did. Yeah, that was called Thunder Sculpture Rising, right? The original Neil Young title, which sounds like him. Then it was shortened to Thunder Sculpture, and they were what are they called now? Thunder Studios. Yeah, that was all Neil Young stuff that he had in his garage in Topanga Canyon, and they brought it here with the idea of opening up and for commercial purposes. But Neil was never around that much. He's never anywhere that much. So it was really hard for them to get the studio going, and nobody can make any decisions without getting a hold of Neil. And it's hard to get a hold of him sometimes. So it kind of folded, and then they sold all their stuff. They just retained the name Thunder, but they sold it to a New York syndicate or something.
Second album is definitely different from the first, I think mainly because of Fred's lead singing. Can you?
Yeah, I can talk a bit.
Okay, were you going to be the lead singer? Were you planning on singing at all with the group other than backup? Or?
Yeah, I was planning on singing with the group, but not taking the whole works. Chad was the actual lead singer. Mm-hmm. And after he left, it just came about that I was going to take all the lead singing. And Randy said go, and I went. So did my voice.
I really like it. I mean, it's distinctive, Well, what do you think of this album compared to the last, or don't you like to...
Well, it's kind of like two different groups. Fred wasn't on the first album at all, so his identity is missing. And Chad is barely on the second album, just in a couple of cuts. And it's kind of like, I think there was only one Crosby, Stills and Nash album cut, if you know what I mean. And then there was a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. a different group with different ideas and different identities. And actually, Brave Belt 2 should be called Brave Belt 1 because it was the beginning of a new group. And the sound does not even compare to the first album. There's the only similarity might be a couple of songs with some 2- and 3-part harmony, but the whole feel and the idea behind it is, we're trying to get into more rock and roll. I think Canada can use a good rock and roll group, like a Led Zeppelin, Creedence type, and that's what we're trying to get into.